Thank you very much for joining us today. I am Ariel Coplan. I'm one of the co-founders of Not 9 to 5, and today we are going to be talking about grief. And yeah, I think it's a subject that is, it's going to be a very vulnerable conversation, and I think that I'm feeling very fortunate to be surrounded by people who are able to be vulnerable with me. I think it's something that we're all going through right now, and whether people realize it or not, we are affected by it. So, without further ado, we are joined by some great people, and I'm just going to go through a little content warning, as it's important to understand that the aim of the conversation is to have real and honest dialogue. We may be discussing grief, trauma, use, or multiple forms of mental health, such as depression, anxiety, and suicide. If at any point you're feeling uneasy or uncomfortable in the conversation, please feel free to jump off. We are going to be recording it, and so you'll be able to watch it at a later date and jump back on if you have interest. We may go over some dialogue. Sorry, if at any point you're seeking to speak to a trained crisis counselor in Canada, text 686868, text home at 686868, or in the States, 741 texting home. Wow, that was a mouthful. I don't know. It was like a tongue twister. I'm sorry about that. I think it would be for us, Hazel and I were talking earlier today, and I think it's important that we're going to kind of do a check-in around the state of how we're doing with regards to everything that's happening in the world this last week. It's been a really rough one, I think, for a lot of people, and we wanted to just spend a bit of time on that. So, because we're going to be touching on that, we might go a little bit over in terms of our timing, and if you guys need to come back to the video another time, if you have other obligations, then we will be recording it, so you can do so.
Thanks for that, Ariel. I just wanted to add that in this little housekeeping in the chat box, I did copy and paste the information that Ariel said about the crisis response text, and as well a link to our resources that we have on our website. Today I included a new link for resources if anyone is interested, for a website called grief.com. And it is, sorry, I don't know why I'm getting a weird sound. Is anyone else getting like a weird background sound? No, it's just me. Okay. Grief.com is owned and operated by David Kessler, who is known as like a world-renowned expert on grief. And he also has a section on for COVID-19 specific resources if anyone's interested. So my name is Hassel Aviles. I'm the other co-founder of Not 9 to 5. More of a front of house industry veteran. We're so grateful and so excited to have two guests today, Mandy and Nina. And I would love to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, please. I don't care who goes first. Mandy, you go first.
Okay, so my name is Mandy McIsaac. I'm currently the catering sales and event manager for the Gusto 54 restaurant group's offsite catering. So I oversee their catering division, at least the sales and business development of it. My chef's on here today. Hello, chef. I have been with the restaurant or like the Gusto restaurant group for I believe 7 years on and off. I have been working in the industry though for 18 years. I have gone from McDonald's to pubs to boutique restaurants in Toronto. Overseeing now the catering element is taking that experience in the restaurant on the road with me, which is nice to be able to kind of give the catering industry in Toronto a bit more of a restaurant vibe and raise the bar in that sense. So I did all of my schooling in event management. I am a trained wedding planner. I have my CMP as a corporate event manager as well. And yeah, this has been a really great outlet. Like they've essentially trusted our team with developing this catering company, and it's just skyrocketed in success up until this year. We're facing our best year yet. We had 55 weddings that are now being rescheduled or going where they need to go at the moment. So our losses have been quite large because actually we do all of our sales at the beginning of the year. So it's I'm excited to speak both to what the restaurants are facing, since we do own Gusto 101, Trattoria Nervosa, Chubby's Jamaican Kitchen, and our new one, Gusto 501, that only opened for a month before closing down for the pandemic. You can all, I'm sure, internally cringe at how difficult that would have been. I try to stay in touch with all of my the staff that I'm able to, and I did ask a lot of them questions to kind of help answer properly today, and come with a couple different front of house and back of house voices behind those answers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mandy. Hi guys, I'm Nina Purewal. So my experience with grief is actually quite personal. Over the course of my lifetime, which is almost 40 years, I have lost my entire family, quite traumatically and in different ways. And this has kind of taken a turn in my personal life. I worked, corporate for the majority of my career. I went to business school. I worked in sales and marketing and worked on a number of global brands. And then in 2010, kind of hit a point of like peak stress, and decided to just leave everything, leave my career, sell my house, and just do something drastic. And I went to California for a year, completely unplugged, and studied mindfulness and meditation in the redwoods, which I think kind of played a role in how I heal and how I process grief. So now I came back, did a little more corporate, and realized it's not for me anymore. So I founded a company called Pure Minds. We do mindfulness and meditation workshops for companies and even the public sector as well. Co-wrote a best-selling book, which is called Let That Shit Go, which has over 100 tips on how to find peace of mind and happiness in the everyday. And now, just my business has also taken a massive hit. I had a number of great workshops lined up for the year. I was ramping up this year, and then everything got canceled. Some things went online, some didn't. So I think also my personal experience with grief is definitely bubbling up right now. It plays a role in how I coach and teach, and I really hope that I know today is going to be valuable because you guys have done such an amazing job every week working hard to bring mental health awareness to this entire industry. So I hope that at the end of the day you have some more clarity on grief and what it is and what it isn't, and how you really shouldn't put any parameters around it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you guys so much. I love letting people introduce themselves. It's always so amazing, and it's always way better than what I would have said. So thank you both. Okay, so before we jump into the webinar on grief, Ariel and I spoke this morning, and we both just felt like I have so much going on just after this last week that I feel, because every time I go on social media, anytime I open my phone, if you look at the news, just the current climate there's a lot going on, and seeing as the topic is so fucking relevant. I mean, grief, when I hear that word and what's happening this last couple days, I just wanted to address the elephant in the room. And I'm not a Black person, obviously, but I do identify as a woman of color. So I just wanted to give the panelists a chance, if you wanted to at all, share anything that you're feeling. I just wanted to address the elephant in the room and not just like jump right into the webinar as if it's just the regular day.
Yes, thank you. I posted today too, which felt, this is scheduled like 2 weeks ago, and I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk about this, but to definitely address my privilege to sit here and complain about loss of sales and to complain about closure at this point just seems irrelevant. But in fact, it's not irrelevant, because it's one of what I think is many feelings that we're having. And so the way I kind of worded it today was, if we give today the space to address one thing that hurts, then you can kind of focus on it like an acupuncture needle, just going at one muscle. And if what we can do is walk away from this, and viewers can feel a little bit better, or maybe feel like they have more community about one thing in their life that hurts, then I think that we've done a justice. It doesn't mean that this is more important than anything else that's happening at all right now. But it does give you 1 hour to focus on one issue that might be causing you strain. And I'm obviously extremely privileged to be able to prioritize that right now.
Yeah, just like Saul, I'm not a Black woman, but I'm definitely a woman of color, and I've felt a number of things, growing up in Canada as first generation Canadian. But I think with everything coming up, the best thing to do is to just honor it all and honor your own feelings around it, because there's such a range of things going on, online, and what's acceptable and what's not. And I think that the important thing, and I know we're going to talk about judgment, is to not judge and honor what you're feeling, and don't be afraid to speak. I think a lot of the Black community, wants people who are not Black to advocate and to honor and to validate everything that's going on right now. So, we're making it a point on our social media accounts to kind of mute our content and, share content of theirs, because, it's been years and years of just suppression. And, I validate all the rage and the emotion and what's going on right now, because, if we put ourselves in the situation of what's gone on, just in the last, 2 weeks, if that person was our family member, we would be outraged. We would be, we would be completely angered. We would, and all of that should be validated. It doesn't matter, what background you are, what race. If someone does, engages in that kind of abuse to anyone, it's not right. So, I hope you're all honoring what you're feeling, and don't be afraid to bring it to surface and share it, because we're all feeling something. That's for sure.
I think one of the things that Hassel and I have talked about a little bit as well is just the need for education around this. And there's so many bad media sources and so much information that I think it's important that we all spend time and actually filter through what seems to be real, and spend a bit of time doing a bit of research as to what's being talked about. And I think the other aspect to that is feel the feelings. Like, I feel like, as you were saying, Mandy, like, the issues that we're having right now, I feel privileged to have them, even though it doesn't make them any less. It's still very much about the fact that at the end of the day, business or no business, we have our lives. And I think that it's important to feel the feelings. And, some of these feelings are uncomfortable. And I think it's important that we're uncomfortable. And it's important that we understand why we're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks for sharing. I know. Anyways, today's conversation will help, because it is about grief, and I think that there's a lot of grief, not just around this topic, but like we've covered already, so many others. All right, Ariel, do you want to start on the first question?
Totally. So, I think a big part of this is we're talking about grief without the idea of someone having just died. So, I mean, Nina, how would you describe and define grief?
Yeah, I mean, the way it's actually defined is grief is the response to the loss of something. Okay, so it doesn't. I mean, typically it is a person, but I love this whole idea of defining grief to talk about, what is happening right now and how we've lost, some of us have lost our jobs, our businesses, our livelihood, our ability to go out and touch people and talk to people and be affectionate with people. I mean, that's definitely, a feeling of loss. And I think what you said earlier as well is, you need to feel it. And, Jay-Z talks about the need to feel, you need to feel it to heal it. And I think that's so important, that we need to honor it. And I know, people are out there saying, I'm so lucky to be alive, and I'm lucky to have my privilege, and that's all true, but it doesn't, you can still validate how you're feeling around this loss and this pandemic. That's still very real. So it's important to kind of, honor your emotion, because I suppressed my grief personally for 20 years. Like, I had an incident when I was 16. I lost my dad and my brother, and I just kind of moseyed on through my life, and just was like, completely suppressed and repressed it. And it came out in a really bad way, like about 5 years ago. So I've learned that when stuff comes up now, to just feel it, to have that good cry, to have that emotion. And, grief isn't linear. It's not like, I feel better today and it's just going to get better. It's kind of like, one of these. And so just in every day, if you can honor it, and you shouldn't have to put any, judgment around your grief either. You shouldn't have to say, oh, I should be, it's been this many years and I should be healed by now. Or, I have even a breakup is grief. Oh my gosh, we broke up 10 years ago and I'm still feeling it. Don't judge that emotion. Some things you never get over the loss of, especially when it comes to losing people. So this whole pandemic and the impact of it, this is going to sting for a while, even when things go back to normal. I don't think they will go back to normal, but when things, when we finally figure out our new stuff, will still sting. And so, don't judge it. Don't let others judge your grief either. If you're feeling it, that's true and that's honest. And so, it's really important when grief comes up to just feel it.
I think it's such a good way to put it. When we were kind of looking at this, and kind of doing a bit more research into this, I read a quote that I really felt was powerful, and it's, we are all dealing with the collective loss of the world we knew before the pandemic. And I think putting that into context is, like you said, feeling the feelings and acknowledging that the world is going to be different, and what are we going to do within that. You mentioned a little bit about judgment there. How would you say that judgment plays into grief?
Yeah, I think judgment shouldn't play a role in grief, and that's where we go wrong as individuals or society, is that we judge, and we, even I try to even stay away from the 5 stages of grief or anything that kind of puts grief into a box. I mean, they're really good kind of indicators of what you're feeling and what you may be experiencing, but if you don't follow those 5 steps, that is, that's okay. And so I think when it comes to judgment, there shouldn't be any from other people, but there also shouldn't be any from yourself as well. I think that's a really important point to make when stuff comes up. The worst thing you can say to yourself is, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I should be feeling this way, or so and so, 10 other people in my restaurant are okay with this. I should be. No. If that's how you're feeling, then that's how you're feeling. So honor it, don't judge it, and then have some sort of an outlet, which I think we'll get to, of what to do with that emotion. But the worst thing you can do is dismiss it and judge it, because that's when it just gets repressed and it'll come out later in some other way.
There's 2 things that you said that I really want to highlight that I find to be extremely important. I mean, everything what you said to me is important, but 2 things in specific stuck out to me. One of them is that grief is nonlinear, and I think that oftentimes people do try to put it into this box of, like, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, whereas that's not it at all. It's really, quite frankly, you'll be feeling all the feels, and it might be different stages of the grief depending on the moment. And I think the second part is, talking about the judgment aspect again. I have a fear that when we go back to work, Hassel, we were kind of talking about it earlier, I can imagine someone trying to, minimalize someone else's COVID experience based off of the fact that they've experienced it as well. And I think to me, that's an actual fear. I mean, I think that it's important to understand that everyone's experiencing it differently, and it's not something that anyone is experiencing it, more or more important than others. It's important to remember that it affects everyone completely differently.
Yeah, I totally agree. So to bring it into our little hospitality bubble a little bit, taking everything that Nina just shared, Ariel just said, I just want to cover just really quickly some of how this plays into hospitality and how some of this is showing up and will continue to show up, in our industry, in the food and beverage service industry. I really feel that, our industry is really due for a software upgrade. I think that we are running on a really old system that has a lot of archaic principles. And it's going to take obviously a long time to get rid of some of those or adapt them and move forward. I think that in our industry, we have a lot of, historical things that we don't take into consideration on a daily basis, like the brigade system and, a lot of just like really outdated ideas of how emotions show up in humans. And so this obviously plays into grief because all of us are feeling so many emotions right now. And Nina, I love that you talked about how, it's not always just the 5 stages of grief, because you're absolutely right about that. I think that it's a helpful model, that can sometimes validate certain people's experiences. But I think that, one of the biggest misconceptions is that you only feel those 5. And so I think, to bring it back to hospitality, I just wanted to cover the fact that, the loss of normalcy, the closures, the cancellations of, how many weddings, you mentioned, Mandy, how many events, as an event producer, are not going to happen this year. It's a lot of grief over things that aren't necessarily traditionally thought of as grief. Like, yes, people have died, but there's also other things that we've lost. And so I wanted to hear from you, Mandy, in terms of how grief has shown up for you in relation to your job, in relation to our industry. I wanted to hear a little bit about you and bringing it into our little hospitality bubble.
Yeah, it was the word grief didn't actually show up for some time. I think I would be on the phone with Chef and say, "I'm feeling this, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling this," and he's like, It's grief. Like, that's what you're." And I almost didn't want to call it grief to, I guess, take away from what I had thought grief was. And I was, to me, I'm also like, these kind of feel a little superficial to give it that the weight of the term grief. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I'm definitely hitting all these phases. So then I Googled what the phases were so that I could figure out which one I was at, so that I could determine how soon I would be done them, so that I could just get on with life. And then I realized that I wasn't making my way through those at a rational pace at all. And every day I seem to go through them at different points in the day. So I'm a project manager. I just want to know when the end date is. So for me, it was trying to articulate now and make sense of what these feelings were. Talking to our team and saying, also, these feelings are okay. You are all hypersensitive individuals because this is hospitality, and we literally make money off of you being sensitive. We're going to continue to embrace that sensitivity even as this industry collapses in on itself. So for us to have these large emotions, it's very forgivable because that's what makes you so good at your job in the hospitality sector. So there were a couple things. I tried to kind of break it down a little bit into the different directions I was feeling the loss in. Big one for me is momentum. I immediately, the first week was great. Did a lot of yoga. Thought I was going to, excel at my yoga, but apparently that's not stimulating enough for me. not having the direction, not having deadlines, my personality type thrives off of that. Um, it was difficult to not have anywhere to go. And in turn, I did not feel a new surge to take on new projects. So that was an interruption that was a little bit confusing. I didn't have anyone to report to. I didn't have to, clock in. I had obviously some work rescheduling weddings, which kept me, I think, head above water, but it was very difficult. The social change was another big one. Um, Getting away from my team, not being able to check in with my team to remind my team I am on their side and I will do everything in my power to act as their representative as things change, was very difficult. I know we have a very rah-rah team attitude with the Gusto group. We do things like we have these pep rallies, these power hours where you feel like you can take on the world after. That energy shifted a little bit, because you're not seeing them and you're just not feeding off of it. And that ciao bella just wouldn't happen in your day. And you would think, do they care? Are they thinking of me? They are. They're just at home thinking about you. So that energy, you lose that energy connection, which was very difficult. And then lastly, the financial loss. And I mean, what I've watched, I work on a commission base, and watching my year and my team's year, we all benefit from how busy we get because we structured it that way. It's very similar to the restaurant in that sense, where there's hours, there's tip out, whatever. We have a different structure, but it is kind of similar. Watching that CERB come in when I know how much a lot of people do normally make, it's difficult. And for us personally, we will not reopen our doors and see that income. We will open our doors and be working on sales for maybe the next 6 weeks, maybe after that, maybe next year. I'm going to have a hell of a 2021 if all pans out, but that's all I can lean on right now. And defining, what success looks like. I really liked our profit loss reports where I would say, look at my sales, give me my gold star. And those three elements have really taken a hit. And what that has done to me personally has been very, it's made me question like a lot of things, and it feels like every time I have a sip of coffee, my mind's just going a mile a minute. It's difficult to sit in that when there's really nothing else but silence going on.
Thank you for sharing that, Mandy. Like that, I had to take a couple breaths there. Really, it's so relatable. It's so resonates. Sure. Especially one thing I don't think many people talk about, or I guess address, is also like the grief over the loss of income. I mean, it's weird to grieve money. You feel like, what kind of person am I? What does that say about me? I'm grieving something that's like part of the capitalist, system, but we're all part of it, and it's our livelihood. And
it's a big deal. It makes a lot of a difference when at any point, but when you're in your 30s, I've explained this to you, like, determines when I'm going to have kids. It determines when I'm going to pay off my student loans. It determines if I'll ever pay for a house. And not only that, it shakes your core foundation in, I've invested all of my school, everything has gone into this, and it just got shaken. Is this ever going to be able to pay the bills again? It will, but you miss a couple paychecks and that will really rattle you,
Yeah, but I think, to add to that, like, there is uncertainty as to when that will come back, because there's a lot of offices that are reopening. I know people that started to reopen their businesses today in other industries, and we don't have that right now. We actually don't even have a date. So that's hard for restaurants, for catering and events. You can say 2021, 2022. I know some venues are opening but still, I mean, to just not know, I don't know. I think that it's important to acknowledge the grief around that uncertainty.
But
Yeah,
and what you said, Mandy, is so relatable. I mean, I
yeah,
feel exactly,
good.
everything from the human connection and your routine, being there and having these meetings, like you said, leaving so positive after these meetings, to the juxtaposition now, which is, I love the connection that we have via the Zoom calls, but it's a different time, and there is definitely a different energy. um, and I think something that I've kind of experienced as well is uh, trying to get the businesses going to an extent right now to stimulate cash flow, while trying not to also put any staff in a dangerous position. And I think there is a real duality there where, no takeout model will ever replace the restaurant's business model, because it's literally just not the same. But a little bit of cash flow is better than no cash flow, but not when it comes to human lives. And I think that's the other side of it. And so there's a real, you know, internal struggle there.
Yeah, I think last week's topic on the reopening and the mental health, I feel like that could be its own series because I had so many thoughts on that. And um, I think the mental process people will go through first in the takeout phase, where you have primarily back of house, and then as you start to get front of house and our support staff and the risk that they'll be taking on, I think that adds to your current grief, because you're starting to imagine all of the ways it can just go back to normal, because you're just desperate for it to go back to normal. Well, it's kind of gonna feel worse before it feels better, and to sign on for that is very difficult. But for some of us, this is your life. This is what you've chosen to do. You're here because this is what you're best at.
Nina, how has grief shown up for you during these COVID times?
Yeah, it's been quite complex for me, and I've been, just trying to honor, as I said earlier, honor everything I'm going through. I actually have a session with my grief therapist tomorrow. But I think in general, that general sense of loss, as you guys talked about, the loss of income, the fact that I had great momentum on my business, and that came to like a raging halt. And even like seeing people, like, yes, I'm like super affectionate, but what I do for business is I talk about mindfulness and meditation. A lot of people after our workshops come up to me after and talk about, a situation or personal situation that they're going through, and we have a good chat. And there's something different about doing that online. Like, someone's not going to DM me as much as they might, come up to me in person if I'm there. So I really miss that human connection. I really thrive off that. So I'm missing that a lot. And then I think, there's also the sense of community that I'm missing, and just little things. You guys are grieving the loss of, going into work, but your customers are grieving you. Like, one of my favorite things is going out to restaurants, and or coffee shops and grabbing a coffee with a girlfriend, or going out as a family, or going out as a bunch of girls to have drinks and dinner. That's just a huge way that people connect and socialize, and I know people are missing that. So that's coming up for me. And then also, just with all the the personal losses that I've had, that is coming up big time right now. I don't know if it's we're decluttering our house, so we're going through everything. So I'm finding stuff that I kept in boxes from people I've lost, and it's bringing up stuff. So I'm feeling emotions that I haven't felt in years around grief and around the loss. And there's also a collective loss that's happening as well. So if you are highly sensitive, if you're an empath, if you are you pick up on energies, you might be feeling the loss of everything going on right now. It might not even be your personal loss, but you might be talking to a friend and picking that up, or just watching the news, or engaging in social media. Like, I know last night I was awake from I think it was like 4 to 6 or something. I just woke up, and I try not to check my phone if I'm awake. I try to check the TV clock. But I just picked up my phone and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop scrolling, couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop watching videos. And like, I just felt wonky this morning. Like, what a day to be talking about grief, because, everyone is feeling it. We're all picking up, what's happening. And which in a way is, we're in it together. I know it's a cheesy phrase, but, I think if you're feeling lost, sometimes it might not even be your own. I've had friends who've lost their jobs, and kids are being affected, and it's a really, really messy time. So for me, grief has been, my old losses coming up, the losses that are coming, not living the life I got so accustomed to living, and then also, picking up on the grief and loss that other people are experiencing as well.
Thank you for sharing. That's really powerful.
I really appreciate you sharing that one piece. Sorry, Ariel.
No,
Nina, about it possibly bringing back past grief from many, many years ago, because that's definitely happened to me, but I don't know that I've named it. I don't think I had that moment of like, oh, right, that's also happening on top of all this other stuff.
Yeah.
I think if anyone's listening, if you've lost people really close to you, or lost other things, so not to go down a rabbit hole, but like, I got divorced 6 years ago, and there's a lot of grief that goes with divorce that a lot of people don't talk about. And I've noticed that was triggered, in the last couple of months, which is weird because that was 6 years ago. And it's not a death grief, but it's a grief, and it's a significant grief. It's a loss of, not a relationship necessarily, but also like a structure, because we had kids, and so it's like a family of 4 gets now into 2 separate homes. And anyways, but yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up the idea that one grief could possibly trigger another grief. That's really valuable. Thanks, Nina.
Thanks. I just want to add one more thing too. I had a friend a few years ago who, super healthy guy, like played hockey, ate pretty healthy, just like super fun, like easygoing personality, and ended up having a stroke. And, with the stroke came like multiple surgeries. He had 2 young kids. And he was, he became depressed, and, he was seeing a therapist. And one of the things that the therapist said to him that's always stuck with me is, you're going through grief. And he's like, oh, that doesn't make sense. I haven't lost anyone. She'd be like, well, you lost your old self. And you're grieving your old self that used to go out and play hockey, that had weight. Like, he's like, I look at videos of my kids when, before the stroke, and I could run around with them. And he's like, I have no energy. I get tired all the time. So I think that's another thing that we're all going through, is like, we're grieving our old self as we knew it. Maybe it was a social person, or a person, you might have had this title you're associated to, and now you've lost your job. And we're just, our kids were in school, now we're homeschooled. Like, our whole identity has changed in this pandemic. So I think a big part of it too is just we're grieving our old life, we're grieving our old self as we used to be.
That's such a great way to put it. The world has changed, and the world is changing, and tomorrow is going to be different than today. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. It's no secret that in our industry, there's a lot of constructs that, as Hassel mentioned, are very archaic. The we chef, yes chef, let's go right away. Asking for help is not something that we're encouraged to do or trained to do. We're meant to be self-sufficient and, accomplish the most that we can. So I think a lot of people who have been in the industry for quite some time have this innate, sense not to ever ask for help. And, I guess, Mandy, what would you say, and Nina as well, I'd love to hear your input around, someone who's feeling overwhelmed and don't know how to ask for help?
Well, it's always hard to kind of refer to myself as being the one that oversees our commissary kitchen, just because my chef team, as well as we work in partnership with each other, and a lot of that includes leading by example. done our best, and I would say they significantly have done their best to strip our kitchen of a typical hierarchical chef positioning and instead lead from, the middle of the problem. Just especially, we are kind of more of the startup of the restaurant group, and a lot of what we do has had to be created kind of on the go. So in order to do that, a big thing that I can contribute, just as sorry, my bulldog's losing his shit right now. Some things that I personally feel like I can contribute, aside from just, contributing to a healthier culture, is talking to my staff, particularly about how to talk about their worth. A lot of just, I think, like business elements can be applied to some areas that cause significant amount of stress. So being able to talk about their worth in negotiations, talking about how to, prepare to ask for a raise, prepare to, if they are feeling unsatisfied with how they are treated, having them sit down and learn how to kind of articulate what the problem is. Sometimes I feel like that's very difficult, and it is not something that is taught in culinary school. So sometimes just lending an ear to that will help kind of pinpoint where the difficulty there was. And that just kind of comes from a lot of conversation and befriending employees. Talking about career mapping. Sometimes a lot of stress is just coming alone from feeling like they're stuck. And they're stuck in their position, and they're stuck because they don't know how to map their way out. So talking about, I like to reference, I was a server, I was doing this. I've made my way to, to kind of overseeing catering, and I personally see myself as being in business development. When you are able to reframe what your role is and then what your contribution is, it helps people kind of see their resources a little bit easier. Frankly, I feel like this opportunity to kind of shock our system and be taken out of that also provides a lot of opportunity for maybe looking at your position in a new light. So, looking at financially at, tips not being an unending fountain. Okay, are we going to build better financial habits when we get back into this? Myself included. Like, okay, Mandy, you don't have any more commissions coming off of events for 2020. What do your finances look like? Great. How do you talk to the rest of your staff about what their finances, which are shifting, are going to look like? I'm a little bit more of a they know that they can do meditation and that they have community and that they have some of these things already structured. What I can provide is more of a personal development approach into how to take these shitty lemons and make some lemonade out of it. And I think both are necessary to have a good culture, but that's why everybody contributes to it, and not just myself.
Yeah, I think the psychological safety that you're describing is super important. Absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of restaurants and food and beverage in general don't have. And I do feel like that's one of the things that would be the biggest shift that we need to start seeing more of. Absolutely. How about you, Nina? How would you, like someone who's feeling overwhelmed, how would you encourage them to be able to ask for help?
Yeah, I would. Well, Mandy touched on it, but the first thing I would say is like definitely don't judge. And I notice myself judging myself. It's like I'm a mindfulness teacher. I do meditation every day, and like I'm losing my shit. So I was like, how can I'm supposed to be an example for other people? But I'm just trying to keep it real. And it's like, no, I'm not far from perfect. I'm not in a peaceful place every single second. So kind of letting go of that judgment, I think, is really important, and to also know that you're not alone. Everyone, hopefully, conversations like this, or you see what people are posting. No one is alone in feeling lost, feeling grief, feeling that intensity. And so there should be no embarrassing feeling or resistance to reaching out, because anyone and everyone can understand that people are struggling right now. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, I think about the impacts of not reaching out and kind of staying in that kind of scary space versus getting help. So the importance of reaching out is also key.
Mandy, why don't you think that our industry has better support systems in place? It sounds like what you're describing at Gusto sounds really, really special, and you know what? I think that's such an amazing thing to hear. Why don't you think other restaurants and operators kind of approach things similarly?
Honestly, I think restaurants are kind of used to making their way through a conveyor belt of shit and throwing their body at the problem because it's the cheapest way to do it. Um, it's how I was raised in restaurants, you know. There is probably a better system that could deal with something, but instead we're just going to make the people who are working work twice as hard. And that's um it's an easy loop to get caught into. Um, but I think when you get younger restaurant groups like ours come in, they have people who are walking up and saying, "We have an opportunity for a blank slate here. Um, let's start building this up properly. Let's make sure that if we're investing in our staff and we're providing benefits, which we do to all of our staff who have worked with us after 3 months, um, then we won't it won't cost us money down the line to have to hire a whole new staff every spring when patio season opens, which is something I've seen everywhere. I think people have started to crunch the numbers and they realize that happier staff are a lot more affordable than unhappier staff that are continually turning over. So that's where the investment goes, and I think it's paid off. What we're trying to deal with the pandemic, I think they're doing the best we can. Again, baby's first pandemic, but like it has to remain focused on the person or the people who are actually making those wheels turn, because that is where all of your most valuable assets are. So for us to consistently, when we're thinking about a business development, it's always coming back to the people and saying, okay, what can we do to support this crew? Because I can't lose them because I've invested so much in them. You know, that's our main concern right now. But slowly, when we start bringing people back on, is taking all of that into consideration so that people feel like they were treated the right way from the very beginning.
So I wanted to ask Nina if, before I move on to the next question, I wanted to ask if, I know you had offered to do this, so I'm going to take you up on your offer. Can you walk us through some breathing techniques? And I love how you wrote it in the email. You were like, people are always telling other people, like, just breathe, just calm down. Like, and I think when it comes to grief, I mean, I hear that all the time. Sadly, I've had my share of experiences going to funerals and the grief around actually losing a person, but also I've closed businesses, and like I touched on earlier, gone through divorce and been around lots of other people that have done those things amongst many others with grief. And oftentimes you are told a lot, just breathe, just calm down, just before we move on to the next final two questions, I was wondering if you could help us breathe through this moment right now.
Yeah. Did you want me to talk about holding space as well? Because I know you had that question.
Sure.
Okay. Because I think it all ties in. So, Hassel asked about, what does holding space mean? How do you actually hold space for people when everyone's buckets are empty? And I think, breathing is part of this, and I'll get to that in a second. But one thing I wanted to point out is, there's so much. The reason why there's so much coming up for people right now is because we also have no distractions. Like, we're stuck in our four walls, touching and talking to the same people we talk to every day. And I kind of learned this in 2010 when I went to the ashram. I completely unplugged. So I had, no phone, no email, no internet, no friends. I told my friends, if you wanted to get a hold of me, you could write me a letter. And so much shit came up for me that year because I had no distraction. So we live in a very easily distracted society. So when stuff comes up, it's like, oh, let me just pick up my phone. Let me go grab a coffee. We go into avoidance mode, but there's not an option for that right now. So right now we're being forced, and And that's why a lot of old stuff is coming up, stuff that we might have repressed years ago, or stuff we hadn't dealt with, or pain bodies. It's all kind of coming to surface right now because we don't have any distractions. So we have to kind of look it square in the face, which is scary at the time, but it's actually, quite liberating to go through the pain and honor it and then let it go. But that might be a key as to why stuff is coming up. And I think in terms of how do you hold space is just make sure you have that open communication. If you're living with people, I think communication is key around what you're experiencing, understanding what they're experiencing, because stuff is coming up for you that you might have never talked to them about, and vice versa. So I think communication is really important with friends or family. Is look, I've stopped saying when people are like, "How are you?" I've stopped saying I'm fine. I'm gonna say I'm fine, but I'm like, I'm upset today. I'm pissed off today, or I'm hurting today. Be honest, and that kind of starts with communication. Be honest with your communication, and then holding space just means, honoring yourself and honoring them. Just being there. That's all it means. It doesn't mean trying to advise. It doesn't mean trying to fix or solve the problem. It just means being present with that person as they're going through their shit. That's simply what the whole holding space means. I'm here for you if you need me. And sometimes it's holding space means to just have quiet days, where you're holding space for each other. And so when all of this stuff comes up, as Hassel said, so many people say, "Oh, just take a few deep breaths," and it's like, okay, yeah, that's not helping. But one thing I kind of realized along the way is how to take deep breaths is really critical, because a lot of us have become very accustomed to breathing through our chest area. As children and infants, we breathe through our diaphragm, but over time we kind of forget how to do that. And we now, if you take a couple breaths and, you put your hand on your chest, you'll notice your chest rising and falling. But what's happening now even is as more panicked you get, more worried, more anxious, the more shallow your breathing is becoming. And so what you want to do is you want to just take breaths from your diaphragm. So, I don't know if you want to practice it right now, but if you put your hand on your stomach and you take a breath in, you should feel your stomach inflating like a balloon. You should feel all the air all the way down, as I said, to your diaphragm. And as you exhale, you want to kind of deflate that balloon and push all that air out. So what this does is it slows our breath. It kind of connects us to self and source. The only reason we're alive is because we are breathing. But it just allows you to bring in a little bit of calm because you're not having that constant shallow breathing. So, when you are experiencing a moment of stress or panic or anxiety, just close your eyes. And I love this because it's all, you don't need anything for it. It's all built in your system. It's just take a few really deep, big belly breaths. And again, picture that kind of balloon inflating as you breathe in and deflating as you exhale.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Nina. I think that, everything you just said is so valuable in terms of you made such good points around holding space, because you're right. It's hard to do that when you're experiencing it yourself, and I think when you start thinking about, filling yourself up, or even just taking that moment to take a couple actual deep breaths, not just fast kind of shallow breathing, I guess you called it. One thing I wanted to touch on as well is I think that there's so much comparison in terms of grief right now too. I know we've touched on it a bit earlier, but I just wanted to bring it back because I think sometimes when we get caught up thinking even when I hear you, Nina, share your story, it feels so hard to hold my own grief when I hear your story, because I haven't gone through that. And I was listening to a podcast before putting this together, and Ariel and I actually both listened to it. And the one thing that we took away from it that was so powerful was that, at one point, David Kessler says it was the podcast he did with Brene Brown. I don't know if anyone's listening to the Brene Brown podcast, but it is highly recommended. But the episode that she did with David Kessler, he goes, the hardest grief is your own, you know? And I think that that is so powerful to think about, is that like, I can't think about your grief. I mean, I can't think about it, but I don't know, I'll never understand it fully, right? And I'll never understand, you know, Mandy, your grief, and Ariel, your grief. But really, truly, I think if we can just hold space for our own grief and understand that that's really the hardest grief we're going to feel, because it's the only one that we really fully feel. I found that really helpful. And the deep belly breathing, I have to say, is a huge, huge help. I almost call it like a body hack, because it, like, I feel like it hacks my system, right? I don't know. Do you find that, Nina? Like, it just...
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a woman who coined the term email apnea. She says every time we open up our email, we stop breathing. Like, so many things, like our stress has gotten to the point where, yeah, it's physiologically affecting us. And so, like, letting all that air into your system, it absolutely calms you down. Air and out. And when you breathe out too, like, work to get all that air out. Push every single ounce of breath you can out of your, you know, your mouth or your nostrils, and get all of it out. And actually a really cool, so I'm going a little off topic, but a really cool meditation technique that Kate and I, my co-author, do, and that a lot of people are using right now, is if you want to take it a step further, you can breathe in light, like breathe in, you know, light, bright light, anything kind of positive, and you breathe out. As you breathe out, picture kind of black smoke. Just breathe out anything negative. So your body is kind of healing from it and releasing it. And it's just a way to let go of all the intensity.
It's amazing how, you know, healing deep breaths are. You know, it's so, like you said, it's something that we all have, and it's just the tools aren't being used. You know, we're all such shallow breathers, and we don't really try to maximize. But I mean, it's amazing what a difference it makes. Mandy, do you see any opportunity in this time for business development, like, you know, rethinking structures, rethinking organization, you know, anything that you would consider to be an opportunity in this time of crisis?
Yeah, I feel like the way I'm processing, like, snapping out of it is definitely, I could use some slow breathing. Let's just say that, because as an opportunist, I have looked at this chaos and tried to map out how to take advantage of it as best I can. I feel like a common thing that I heard with I know, sorry, we're kind of getting down to the wire here. One thing that I kept hearing from my staff is this is either solidified that they do know that this industry is for them. They know that they are going to come back, and their stress is weathering the storm and what that's going to look like. On the other side, I have heard from staff who have said, you know, this is making me rethink the industry. This is not recession proof, and we before this thought a recession would take a couple months to surface, but this happened overnight. And, you know, even instances of my family has not supported me being in this industry or coming in here, and this has given them leverage to tell me to go get a real job. And that sounds like it sucks, but for people who are looking to be professional servers for their life and work their way up in management and be part of hospitality for their life, that's not always a popular choice, especially if, say, you went to university and have education in a different field. So between these two things, the one thing that I've tried to express to people who have told me both of those is that right now you have one thing that's in front of you. You have an industry in crisis. You can try to move laterally, which is very difficult because no one's hiring. There will be an exodus likely from this. Try not to invest too many feelings in watching people be brought back online. Do not hold that self-worth against yourself, because I feel like that's going to be a common theme, is when it trickles back, there will be a theme there, like it or not, of of who is brought back online as necessity starts to reveal itself. And if capacity is at 30%, there will be a 30% staffing as well, and that is going to hurt. It's going to hurt no matter what. However, I do find that for those coming back, or those, say, maybe even just watching our industry, watch it for efficiencies that could take place. We are going to come back to something that does not fully look like what it once was. So for those who are coming back and say, in a different role, I personally go in a couple times a week and sweep and mop the floors at one of the restaurants. If you're coming in and doing that, you still need to bring 100% to that, take notes, and communicate that to your leadership. Your leadership is they are putting out fires left, right, and center. If you think of yourself instead as a consultant who's coming in during a pandemic to give one task 100% of their attention, then suddenly you're also building new skills. You are working on business development. And if you're able to communicate and articulate that properly, especially with math, which matters a lot, if there's something that could be done in a different way that could help save the company money, we need to hear that. So as leadership brings people back in, your role has completely changed now. You are not doing the exact same job every day. You are coming in to try to make this pandemic proof, safer for all of your staff. You were coming in to help articulate concerns, talk about mental health. This weight now sits on your shoulders, which is kind of awesome because it never would have happened if we didn't have this. So this opportunity has presented itself for you to start making even more out of your role than you ever had before. And I know that doesn't sound shiny and new, but if you want to shift to a different industry, now's the time to start building those skills. And if you want to rise up in this industry and stick with it, now's the time to invest in it. If that
That's
makes
amazing.
sense.
No, it does, for sure. Do you have any tangible recommendations for someone looking to skill build or, develop, as you're saying?
Absolutely. There a lot within the least popular club that I like to join is the Joint Health and Safety Committee. So if you would ever like to be a part of the Joint Health and Safety Committee, also getting certifications like your first aid, if you ever wanted to show interest to your leadership, they will probably invest in it. If there is education that you're like, you know what, I would like to go and learn more about how I can maybe take this course, and you bring that to leadership and say, hey, I'm ready to bring this back to you so that we can make the most out of our resources. Oftentimes they will support that. Maybe not immediately because cash flow is cash flow, but overall they're looking at you now like you want to commit to this company for in good and bad times. And that's what everyone needs right now. We need a team that's going to sit here and weather the storm together and succeed together and fail together and just help connect the in between, because it's very difficult personally as well. Just as a final note, I respond well to a corporate ladder. I think I'm very ambitious, and when I lost that avenue in work this year, when I was temporarily laid off, it hurt. But the one thing that kind of kept me afloat was volunteer work. If you have organized yourself with volunteer in any capacity, I have like a little brownie troop, and they got me through the 2 months that they got more attention than they knew what to do with. But it was the thing that mentally kind of helps me feel like I had a direction. Do not discount being in organized volunteer work, especially things that obviously can be done online, because it can definitely give you sometimes that gold star that you need. I like gold stars. I collect gold stars.
Oh, Mandy, thank you so much. That is excellent advice. I love that bit about volunteering. I volunteered for many years, and it's always given me more than I gave it. I always walk away with more, and I so appreciate that recommendation. I think that's excellent. So thanks everyone for staying with us. We're going to finish up in a few minutes. I just have one final kind of point to make and question to throw out, and then we're going to wrap it up. I feel, to touch on your point, Mandy, and things you said earlier, Ariel, about our industry, is that there's so many changes that are going to come when we open doors again outside of delivery and takeout. And I think that I really wanted to mention this today. So in terms of, like, we talked about psychological safety and creating environments where people feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. That's not always a common thing in our industry. Even you touched on it just now, Mandy, with like talking about mental health openly at work. That's also not a super common thing, in a lot of bars and hotels and restaurants. I guess what I want to say is that it has to now become that. It has to now become a normal thing. It has to now become a thing that we do every day if you're in leadership. I'm not saying that employees need to feel like they need to come to work and talk about their stuff. I'm saying if you're in leadership, I think it absolutely is your responsibility to be vulnerable in front of your team. And obviously you get to choose how that looks. That can be being vulnerable just about your pandemic experience, or that can be being vulnerable about the financial situation of the business, or being vulnerable about how you feel that particular day. And I've heard a lot of owner operators and managers in the past, say things like, well, I don't feel like I can talk about mental health in the workplace because, I'm just not a mental health professional, and I'm just not a mental health counselor, and I've never taken mental health first aid, and like, who am I to, take on this topic? And my response to that, my response to anyone that feels uncomfortable to implement workplace mental health into any restaurant or cafe or hotel, is find someone who does. If you don't feel equipped, to be able to do that, if you're a manager, owner, operator, and you don't feel like you can take on people's grief, people's emotional, sharing or holding space or all of these things, I would encourage you to hire people that do, or surround yourself with people that do, because at the end of the day, it is something that fundamentally, absolutely must happen moving forward in restaurants, in any kind of hospitality business. We need to be able to provide people a psychologically safe workplace for them to work in. If we're providing physical safety, we must also provide psychological safety. If we're taking care of people's physical health, we must also take care of their mental health. And I think it's kind of like we've passed the time of making excuses as to why we can't provide this in this industry. I think it's totally fine if you don't personally feel like you're the right person for that role. That makes sense. Find someone that is. So the final question I had, is, I guess, in response to my little tangent I just went on, is, why do we feel, or, why do you feel that it is important that we feel these feelings of grief? And we haven't really gone down this in this conversation yet, but I wanted to end on it, is to kind of say, like, what happens if we don't? Why is it important to address these feelings of grief? Why is it important to be vulnerable and let yourself, like, we said in the beginning, all of us agreed that we need to feel it. And I guess I'd like to throw it as the final question is, why?
I can speak to that personally. As I said, I suppressed a lot of my grief. So I lost my dad and brother when I was 16, and then I lost my mom when I was pregnant at 34. And when she passed away, that's when everything came up, because it was like, oh my God, my whole family is gone. And I realized in that year, like, how much I suppressed, and it numbed me as a person. I became someone that I can't even relate to my old self anymore. I became that person who was like always happy. I didn't feel okay being vulnerable. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I felt the pressure to just, always fit in. I felt, as a teenager going through that, I couldn't relate to a lot of people, so I just suppressed it. So I think the risk of not honoring yourself and owning everything that you're feeling is you're going to feel more alone. You're going to feel more isolated. You're going to feel, less comfortable in your own skin. The more that I have found that the more I share, the more vulnerable I am, the more free I feel. Because I'm not trying to pretend to be, I'm not trying to wear a mask. I'm not trying to put on a front. And I also connect with so many more people because, as I said earlier, nobody's alone. Everyone's gone through some form of grief. And so what it allows you to connect. So, to answer your question is, I definitely in order to honor the most important person in your life, which is yourself, it's so important to acknowledge all of the emotion. And when it does come up, you can do little things like take breaths, or you can write a journal entry. You can go for a nature walk. You can see a therapist. There's so many things you can do when it comes up. There's so many resources now, especially in the last 5 years. So when it comes up, just acknowledge that it's there and just do something with that, even if it's small. But definitely don't push it back down, because it's going to come up in other ways.
Yeah, I would add to that, because I think that's the core of why we're in this. But since we're applying this to kind of a business model as well, the one thing I would say, maybe the naysayers of prioritizing mental health is, if you can't process that with all the respect that it deserves, it will never leave you. And if it never leaves you, it's going to affect your business. And if it affects your business, it will make you lose money. And I know that's such a heartless way to look at this, but since we are talking about mental health as it affects business, and we're already dealing with razor thin margins, it's irresponsible to leave out the fact that it has a financial impact overall. If your staff feel like they can't call in sick, then they'll leave and they'll go somewhere where that is allowed. And I think we're starting to see illness, definitely, and how that's affecting, our restaurant industry. But the idea that I feel like I can't let my team down because your team doesn't support you taking maybe a mental health day, and you're going to just come in and push through it, or you're going to push through your grief, it will collapse later. Whatever that minute sale is that you benefited is not going to be worth having a stronger team down the line that can yearly increase their profits, because they're becoming a dream team working with one another. It just doesn't make financial sense.
Thank you both, and thank you very much, everyone. I think, Hassel, unless you have anything else to say, I think that's a wonderful place to end. And I just wanted to end on a quote that we read, which is, again, something that we feel really is such a powerful message, which is that there's no way around the pain. The meaning is not in the death. The meaning is what we'll do after the death. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for staying and listening to us all the way to the end. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Mandy. And wishing you all
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for sharing. Bye, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.
You too.